The notification popped up on my phone at 2:43 a.m. Your credit score has dropped 127 points. I stared at the screen in my dark bedroom, heart pounding as I realized someone had just destroyed years of careful financial planning in a matter of hours. What I didn't know was that the person systematically ruining my credit, opening fraudulent accounts, and stealing my identity was sitting 3 rooms away, planning his next move from our shared family home. 6 months later, watching my brother Marcus squirm in his defendant's chair as his hired hacker detailed every illegal transaction they'd orchestrated together, I realized that sometimes the people closest to you are the ones willing to destroy your entire future for their own convenience. Comment below if you've ever discovered that your biggest threat was living under your own roof. This story's about what happens when family betrayal meets federal crime. My name is Amanda Rodriguez, I'm 31 years old, and I spent 8 months having my identity systematically stolen by my own brother, while he smiled at me across the dinner table every night, pretending to care about my financial struggles that he was actively creating. The Rodriguez family had always prided itself on being close-knit and supportive, the kind of family that believed in second chances and helping each other through difficult times. Our parents, Miguel and Carmen Rodriguez, had built a comfortable middle-class life through Dad's 28-year career as a municipal engineer and Mom's work as a high school guidance counselor. They owned their 4-bedroom house in suburban Phoenix outright, had saved diligently for retirement, and measured family success by everyone's ability to support each other during challenging periods. This philosophy had served my brother Marcus exceptionally well throughout his adult life. At 34, he'd managed to fail at no fewer than 6 different business ventures, while maintaining our parents' unwavering financial and emotional support. His first disaster was a food truck operation that collapsed after 8 months when auditors discovered he'd been using the $35,000 startup loan for personal expenses instead of equipment and permits. Mom and Dad covered the remaining debt to protect his credit score. His second failure was a dropshipping business that lasted 14 months before imploding, when customers began demanding refunds for products that were never shipped. Marcus had been collecting payment for orders while spending the money on rent, car payments, and entertainment expenses. When the complaints reached the Better Business Bureau and threatened legal action, our parents quietly settled over $12,000 in customer claims to keep Marcus out of court. The third disaster was a cryptocurrency trading venture that Marcus presented to the family as a sophisticated investment strategy. He convinced our parents to loan him $18,000 for trading capital, and promised to pay them back with substantial profits within 6 months. What he actually did was gamble the money on high-risk digital currency speculation while living off the borrowed funds. When the investments predictably crashed, Marcus claimed he'd been the victim of market manipulation and needed additional time to recover the losses. Business failure number 4 was a consulting company that Marcus established to help small businesses with digital marketing optimization. He collected advance payments from 11 different clients for services he had no ability to provide, then used the money to fund his lifestyle while delivering nothing but generic advice and template marketing materials. When clients began threatening lawsuits for breach of contract, our parents once again intervened financially to resolve the disputes. His 5th failed venture was a real estate investment scheme where Marcus convinced 3 family friends to contribute $8,000 each toward purchasing and flipping a house he claimed to have found through insider connections. The insider connections didn't exist, the house purchase never happened, and the $24,000 disappeared into Marcus's persona. Expenses over 4 months. Our parents covered the entire amount to preserve family relationships and avoid criminal charges. The 6th and most recent failure was an import business focused on trending consumer products from overseas manufacturers. Marcus had convinced 2 former college friends to invest $15,000 each in inventory purchases and business setup costs. The overseas manufacturers didn't exist, the trending products were never ordered, and the $30,000 was spent on Marcus's apartment rent, car payments, and credit card bills. When his investors demanded documentation of their money's use, Marcus produced fake invoices and shipping records that satisfied them temporarily, but eventually triggered suspicions that led to threats of legal action. That's when Marcus moved back home, presenting his living situation as a temporary setback, while he regrouped and developed new strategies for business success. Our parents welcomed him with open arms, offering emotional support and a comfortable living environment while he figured out his next steps. What they didn't understand was that Marcus had never actually tried to build legitimate business. Says, each venture had been a sophisticated way to access other people's money through loans, investments, or family support, which he then used to fund a lifestyle he couldn't maintain through honest employment. Over 6 years, he'd extracted over $143,000 from various sources while producing nothing of value and learning no legitimate business skills. But Marcus had learned something valuable through his pattern of financial fraud: how to identify vulnerable targets, manipulate trust relationships, and exploit people's money systematically while maintaining plausible deniability about high criminal intent. During his most recent business failure, Marcus had discovered online communities where failed entrepreneurs shared alternative income strategies and justified various forms of fraud as beating a system that's rigged against honest people. These forums provided detailed tutorials on identity theft, credit card fraud, social engineering, and financial manipulation techniques that could generate substantial illegal income while minimizing detection risks. By the time he moved back home, Marcus had spent 4 months studying advanced fraud techniques and identifying potential targets among family members and close friends who trusted him enough to share personal information casually. I had spent the previous 8 years building exactly the kind of financial stability that Marcus had never achieved through legitimate means. After graduating from Arizona State University with a marketing degree, I'd worked my way up from coordinator to director at a growing technology startup that specialized in software solutions for healthcare providers. My salary had increased from $42,000 to $87,000 over my career, and I'd lived frugally to save money for a house down payment while building an excellent credit history. My financial discipline was something our family had always celebrated and relied upon. While Marcus spent money on failed business ventures and lifestyle expenses he couldn't afford, I drove a reliable 7-year-old Honda Civic, lived at home to minimize expenses, and consistently saved 35% of my monthly income. My credit score had reached 791 through careful management of 2 credit cards that I paid off completely every month. My savings account contained $94,000 that I'd accumulated over 6 years of disciplined spending and aggressive saving. More importantly, I had established myself as a family member with sound financial judgment and practical decision-making skills. Our parents frequently asked my advice about major purchases, investment decisions, and financial planning strategies. Extended family members sought my input about mortgage applications, retirement planning, and debt management. Friends and colleagues knew me as someone who understood money management and made smart financial choices consistently. This reputation for financial responsibility made me an ideal target for Marcus's fraud scheme. Our parents trusted my judgment completely, which meant they wouldn't question my financial decisions or spending patterns even if they seemed unusual. My established credit history and stable employment made it easy to open new accounts using my personal information. My savings account represented a substantial target that could be accessed gradually without triggering immediate suspicion. Most importantly, my trusting relationship with Marcus gave him access to personal information, daily schedules, and financial habits that outside criminals would need weeks or months to gather through surveillance and social engineering. Marcus began his identity theft operation with small, carefully planned attacks designed to test my detection systems and response patterns. His first target was my daily mail, which he began intercepting and reviewing while I was at work. Within 2 weeks, he'd photographed my driver's license, social security card, and several financial account statements. He'd also noted the timing of various bills and financial communications, giving him advance notice of when I might expect to receive account updates or statements. His second preparation phase involved studying my computer usage patterns and online activities. Marcus observed that I typically checked my bank account on Sunday mornings and rarely reviewed financial information during busy work weeks. He noted which websites I visited regularly, which passwords I used for different accounts, and how I responded to various types of email communications. This behavioral analysis allowed him to time his attacks when I was least likely to notice fraudulent activity immediately. Marcus's first actual attack was opening a Target credit card using my personal information and employment details he'd gathered through mail interception. He made this initial purchase, $147 worth of household cleaning supplies and groceries, seem reasonable and beneficial to the entire family. When the bill arrived 3 weeks later, I assumed it was either a mistake or a very small-scale identity theft incident that could be resolved with a simple phone call. These things happen all the time. Now, Marcus said when I mentioned the unfamiliar credit card statement during dinner. Identity thieves test small purchases before they try anything major. You should probably monitor your credit more closely, and maybe consider freezing your reports until this gets resolved. His advice seemed helpful and informed, exactly what a caring brother should suggest when his sister encountered financial fraud. What I didn't realize was that Marcus was positioning himself as my trusted advisor about identity theft, while he was actively planning more sophisticated attacks against my financial accounts. When my call to Target's fraud department resulted in the charge being reversed and the account being closed, Marcus waited 3 weeks before his next attack. This time he opened a Best Buy credit card with a $3,500 limit, and immediately purchased $2,800 worth of electronics that he sold online for cash. The transaction was timed to occur on a Thursday afternoon when I was in all-day meetings and wouldn't see email notifications until evening. By the time I discovered the Best Buy charge 4 days later, Marcus had already converted the stolen merchandise into untraceable cash and begun planning his next attack. When I called Best Buy's fraud department and explained that I'd never applied for their credit card, Marcus was ready with helpful suggestions about how to handle this escalating identity theft problem. "Amanda, this is getting serious," he said with apparent concern. "These criminals obviously have access to your personal information, and they're testing larger purchases. You might want to consider hiring a professional service to help clean this up and track down whoever's doing this." He offered to research identity theft recovery services and find specialists who could help restore my credit while investigating the source of the fraudulent activity. Within 2 days, Marcus presented me with information about a consultant named Rick Thompson, who charged $2,800 up front but guaranteed to resolve identity theft cases within 90 days. What I didn't know was that Rick Thompson was actually Derek Walsh, a convicted hacker with expertise in financial fraud, whom Marcus had contacted through the online criminal communities he'd been studying. The identity theft recovery service was designed to extract money from me while gathering additional personal information that would facilitate more sophisticated attacks against my financial accounts. Derek's fake credentials were impressive and reassuring. His website featured testimonials from satisfied clients, professional certifications from organizations that didn't exist, and detailed case studies of successful identity theft investigations. When I called his office, Derek's professional demeanor and technical knowledge convinced me that he was exactly the expert I needed to resolve my growing financial security problems. The $2,800 fee seemed reasonable, considering the potential damage that identity theft could cause to my credit score and financial stability. I paid Derek using a certified check, providing him with detailed information about my financial accounts, employment history, and daily routines that he claimed were necessary for conducting a thorough investigation. Within a week of hiring Derek, the identity theft attacks against my financial accounts accelerated dramatically. Someone opened a personal loan for $8,500 using my social security number and employment information. My student loan payments were mysteriously redirected to an account I couldn't access. Most devastating of all, my carefully maintained savings account began experiencing electronic transfers that drained $200, $400 at a time, while I was asleep or at work. "This is exactly what I was afraid would happen," Marcus said when I shared the latest developments during a family dinner. "These criminals are obviously sophisticated and determined. They're escalating their attacks because they know you're trying to stop them." Derek's investigation provided official-looking reports that explained the fraudulent activity as the work of an organized crime ring specializing in financial identity theft. According to his analysis, I had been targeted because of my excellent credit score and stable employment, making me an ideal victim for criminals who needed legitimate-looking profiles to open high-value accounts. "The good news is that we're making progress tracking down the source of these attacks," Derek told me during our weekly phone consultations. "The bad news is that this criminal organization is more sophisticated than we initially realized. They have access to advanced hacking tools and inside information about financial security systems." What Derek didn't mention was that he was the source of the attacks, using the personal information I'd provided to systematically destroy my financial stability while charging me for the privilege of watching my accounts get pillaged. Month 4 brought the most sophisticated phase of Marcus and Derek's criminal partnership. Using Derek's technical expertise and Marcus's intimate knowledge of my daily routines, They began targeting my employment stability and housing prospects. Derek gained access to my work email through a phishing attack that Marcus helped design based on his observation of my professional communications and computer usage patterns. Once Derek had access to my work email account, he began sending messages from my address that made me appear unprofessional and unreliable. He scheduled fake meetings that wasted colleagues' time, sent inappropriate responses to client communications, and created confusion about project deadlines and deliverable expectations. The sabotage was subtle enough to seem like honest mistakes or stress-related performance issues, but comprehensive enough to damage my professional reputation systematically. Amanda's been acting strange lately. I overheard my supervisor telling our department manager during a conversation they thought was private. Her emails have been unprofessional, she's been missing commitments, and clients have complained about confusing communications. I'm wondering if she's dealing with personal problems that are affecting her work performance. The personal problems were being created by the same people who were sabotaging my professional reputation. Marcus and Derek had realized that damaging my employment stability would make me more financially vulnerable and less able to fight their fraud effectively. If I lost my job, or had my hours reduced due to performance concerns, I would be forced to rely more heavily on family support, giving Marcus additional influence over my financial decisions and daily activities. Simultaneously, Derek began targeting my housing applications by contacting landlords and property management companies with false information about my rental history and financial stability. When I applied for apartments, Derek would call the leasing offices claiming to be a previous landlord with negative reports about my tenancy behavior. Mr. N. Rodriguez was consistently late with rent payments and caused ongoing problems with neighbors. Derek would tell prospective landlords using a fake identity he'd created specifically for these reference calls. Left the apartment in poor condition and disputed normal security deposit deductions. I wouldn't recommend her as a tenant. The systematic sabotage of my employment, reputation, and housing prospects was designed to trap me in increasingly dependent living situations where Marcus would have more control over my daily activities and financial decisions. If I couldn't find alternative housing or maintain stable employment, I would be forced to remain at our family home indefinitely, giving Marcus ongoing access to my mail, computer usage, and financial planning discussions. Month 5 brought Marcus's most ambitious fraud attempt: systematic theft of my house down payment savings through wire transfer manipulation. Using Derek's technical skills and the banking access they'd established through previous attacks, developed a plan to steal the $94,000 I'd saved over 6 years of careful financial planning. The scheme involved creating a fake real estate transaction that would justify large electronic transfers from my savings account to accounts controlled by Marcus and Derek. They established false identities for a property seller, real estate agent, and title company, complete with professional websites, phone numbers, and email addresses that would pass casual verification checks. Marcus then began subtly suggesting that I should consider purchasing a house sooner rather than later, citing rising property values and increasing mortgage interest rates that made immediate action financially advantageous. Amanda, with your credit score and savings, you could probably get an excellent mortgage rate right now, mentioned during several family conversations. But if interest rates continue rising, you might lose thousands of dollars in additional payments over the life of the loan. He offered to help me research properties and navigate the home buying process, positioning himself as a support and brother who wanted to help me achieve my financial goals. What he actually planned was to guide me toward the fake real estate transaction that would transfer my entire down payment to accounts he and Derek controlled. The psychological manipulation was as sophisticated as the technical fraud. Marcus had studied my personality, my financial goals, and my decision-making patterns well enough to know exactly which arguments would motivate me to act quickly on a property purchase. He knew I was naturally cautious about major financial decisions, so he framed the house buying urgency as a way to protect my financial interests rather than rush into an imprudent commitment. But Marcus's plan required more time to execute than he'd anticipated, and by month 6, my growing suspicions about the coordinated nature of my financial problems began to threaten the entire fraud operation. The turning point came when I received a phone call from a credit card company about an application I'd supposedly submitted that morning. I had been at work all day in back-to-back meetings with multiple witnesses who could verify my location and activities, making it impossible for me to have submitted any credit applications personally. Someone in your household submitted this application using your home computer, the credit card company's fraud investigator told me. The IP address traces directly to your residential internet connection, and the application was submitted at 2:17 p.m. when most people would be at work. Someone in my household. The words hit me like a physical blow as I realized that my identity theft wasn't coming from random cybercriminals or organized crime rings operating from distant locations. It was coming from someone who lived in my house, had access to my personal information and daily schedule, and knew my routines well enough to time attacks when I would be unavailable to notice fraudulent activity immediately. That night I began thinking through everyone in my household with the systematic analysis I used for professional problem solving. Dad had the technical knowledge to commit some types of financial fraud, but he also had substantial retirement savings and no history of financial irresponsibility. Mom understood financial systems through her work as a guidance counselor, but she was naturally risk-averse and had never shown any interest in technology that would enable online fraud. That left Marcus, the brother who had failed at 6 different business ventures, accumulated massive debts that our parents had repeatedly covered, and recently moved back home after his latest financial disaster. The brother who had been offering helpful advice about my identity theft problems, while showing unusually detailed knowledge of fraud techniques and identity theft recovery services. The brother who had been consistently present during every phase of my financial attacks, offering explanations and solutions that seemed designed to delay my recognition of patterns while providing him with additional information about my responses to fraudulent activity. I installed hidden security cameras in common areas of our house the next day. Within 1 week, I had video evidence of Marcus photographing my mail, using my computer while I was at work, and conducting detailed phone conversations about financial fraud techniques with someone who was clearly providing technical instruction and guidance. The key is timing the bank transfers when she's not monitoring her account, I heard Marcus tell someone during a recorded phone conversation. She checks her balance on Sunday mornings and rarely looks at it during busy work weeks, so I have almost 6 days between transfers to move money without triggering immediate detection. The recordings were devastating confirmation of my worst suspicions. Marcus wasn't just stealing from me, he was actively studying my habits and psychology to make his theft more effective and more difficult to detect. He'd been treating my entire life like a research project, analyzing my behavior patterns to identify vulnerabilities he could exploit for financial gain. More damaging were the recordings of Marcus discussing his long-term criminal strategy with Derek. They weren't just planning to steal my current savings and damage my existing credit, they were planning to destroy my financial stability so completely that I would be forced to become permanently dependent on family support, giving Marcus ongoing access to any income I earned in the future. Once her credit is completely destroyed and she can't qualify for apartment leases or car loans, she'll have to stay home permanently, Marcus explained to Derek during one particularly chilling recorded conversation. Then I can monitor all her income sources and access any new accounts she opens for recovery purposes. The plan was to convert me into a permanent victim who would unknowingly fund Marcus's lifestyle for years while believing I was being supported by loving family during a difficult identity theft recovery period. Instead of stealing a fixed amount and disappearing, Marcus intended to create a long-term exploitation situation where I would never recover my financial independence. That's when I contacted the FBI. Miss Rodriguez, identity theft involving family members is unfortunately more common than most people realize, Special Agent Jennifer Park explained during our initial meeting at the Phoenix field office. But this case involves organized cybercrime, sophisticated technical manipulation, and psychological abuse that go far beyond typical family financial disputes. Agent Park had spent 12 years investigating financial crimes, and had seen hundreds of identity theft cases, but she was particularly concerned by the level of planning and criminal collaboration that Marcus and Derek had developed. Your brother's operation shows characteristics of organized fraud rings that typically involve multiple perpetrators with specialized skills, she told me. The combination of insider access, technical expertise, and psychological manipulation suggests this is part of a larger criminal network rather than an isolated family dispute. The investigation that followed revealed that Marcus and Derek were indeed part of a sophisticated criminal organization specializing in trusted relationship fraud, identity theft, that exploited personal relationships to access victims who wouldn't suspect family members, friends, or romantic partners of financial crimes. Their network included 7 core members with different specializations, Marcus handled target identification and psychological manipulation. Derek provided technical hacking and electronic fraud services. 2 other members created false identity documents and fake business entities, and 3 additional associates managed money laundering and asset conversion operations. Though the group had been operating for over 3 years, targeting people with established credit histories, stable employment, and significant savings accounts. They specifically focused on victims who had trusting relationships with network members and wouldn't immediately suspect family or friends of sophisticated financial crimes. Your brother's group has stolen over $340,000 from 16 different victims across 4 states, Agent Park revealed during one of our investigative meetings. Individual victims have lost between $12,000 and $67,000 each, with most never recovering more than partial restitution. The investigation uncovered detailed records that Marcus and Derek had maintained documenting their victims' psychological profiles, financial vulnerabilities, and optimal exploitation strategies. My case file included over 40 pages of notes, analyzing my behavior patterns, decision-making processes, and emotional responses to different types of financial stress. They've been studying you like a laboratory subject, Agent Park observed. This level of psychological analysis is typically associated with professional con artists or organized crime operations, not family members committing opportunistic identity theft. The federal charges that resulted from the investigation included wire fraud, identity theft, money laundering, conspiracy to commit cybercrime, and racketeering, serious felonies that carried potential sentences of 15 to 25 years in federal prison for each defendant. But the moment that defined everything came during the preliminary hearing, when Derek Walsh made the decision to cooperate with federal prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony would provide the detailed evidence needed to convict all network members while exposing the full scope of their criminal operations. Your Honor, I want to make it absolutely clear that Marcus Rodriguez was not a victim or minor participant in this fraud network. Derek testified from the witness stand, looking directly at my brother's increasingly pale face. He was the primary organizer and the person who identified most of our targets through his family and social relationships. Marcus had hired Derek to help steal my identity, but he'd also cheated Derek out of his promised share of the stolen money by keeping larger portions of the fraudulent proceeds than their original agreement specified. Derek's decision to cooperate with law enforcement was motivated partly by federal prosecution pressure, but also by his anger at being betrayed by the person who'd recruited him into the criminal network. Marcus provided me with his sister's social security number, employment details, banking information, and daily schedule information, Derek continued in his testimony. He specifically requested that I time fraudulent transactions to create maximum financial and emotional stress, because he believed that highly stressed victims would make more mistakes that would create additional theft opportunities. The courtroom was completely silent as Derek described 8 months of systematic identity theft that Marcus had orchestrated from our family home while positioning himself as my supportive brother and trusted advisor about financial security. Marcus told me that his ultimate goal was to destroy his sister's credit and financial stability so completely that she would be forced to remain financially dependent on family support permanently, Derek testified. He said this would give him ongoing access to any income she earned and any financial accounts she opened during her recovery period. Marcus's face had drained of all color as he listened to his co-conspirator provide detailed testimony about criminal plans they developed together. His attorney was frantically taking notes and whispering urgent consultations, but there was no effective defense against testimony from his own criminal partner, supported by recorded conversations, financial transaction records, and documented evidence of their fraud network's operations. Marcus also instructed me to sabotage his sister's employment and housing applications, because he wanted to limit her options for becoming financially independent from family support, Derek continued. He specifically said that if she had a mental breakdown from the stress of identity theft, their parents would never suspect him of criminal activity, and would focus on providing emotional and financial support instead of investigating the source of her problems. The testimony revealed not just the scope of Marcus's financial crimes, but the calculated cruelty of his psychological manipulation. He hadn't just stolen my money, he'd deliberately tried to destroy my mental health and my ability to rebuild my financial stability independently. The trial that followed Derek's preliminary testimony was swift and decisive. Federal prosecutors had recordings of criminal planning conversations, financial records documenting fraudulent transactions, technical evidence of hacking activities, and cooperative testimony from multiple network members who provided detailed evidence about the group's operations. Marcus's defense attorney attempted to portray him as a desperate person who'd made poor decisions during a period of financial crisis, but the evidence showed systematic criminal planning that had continued for years and victimized multiple people who'd trusted him personally. Mr. Rodriguez's actions represent a profound betrayal of family trust and social relationships, Judge Patricia Williams stated during the sentencing hearing. Identity theft is always a serious crime, but identity theft that exploits family relationships and involves organized criminal networks requires the most severe sanctions available under federal law. Marcus was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $89,000 in dollars restitution to me, plus additional amounts to other network victims totaling over $280,000. Derek received 14 years after his cooperation with prosecutors, while the other network members received sentences ranging from 8 to 16 years depending on their roles and the amounts they'd stolen. But the legal victory couldn't repair the damage to family relationships or restore my sense of trust and security in personal relationships. Amanda, I had no idea Marcus was capable of something like this, Mom said during one of our first conversations after the sentencing. He seemed so concerned about your financial problems, always offering to help and suggesting solutions. How could he have been creating the problems while pretending to help you solve them, Mom? That's exactly how sophisticated fraud works. Criminals position themselves as helpers and advisors while they're actively victimizing people, because it gives them access to information and creates psychological cover for their criminal activities. Dad struggled even more with accepting the reality of what Marcus had done to me and to our entire family. He lived in our house for 8 months, eating our food and accepting our support, while he was systematically destroying your financial future. How could someone plan something so cruel against their own sister? The conversations that followed were the most difficult our family had ever experienced. My parents had to confront the fact that their financial and emotional support had enabled Marcus's criminal activities and had given him access to commit sophisticated identity theft against his own sister. They also had to acknowledge that their pattern of rescuing Marcus from the consequences of his poor decisions had prevented them from recognizing the escalating criminality of his behavior. By consistently covering his debts and believing his explanations for business failures, they'd enabled him to avoid accountability while developing increasingly sophisticated methods of financial fraud. We failed both of you, Dad admitted during one particularly honest family discussion. We enabled Marcus's irresponsible and criminal behavior, and we didn't protect you from becoming his victim. Our desire to be supportive parents actually made it easier for him to commit serious crimes. 2 years later, my credit has been completely restored. My savings have been recovered through insurance claims and partial restitution, and I've finally purchased the house I'd been saving for before Marcus destroyed my financial stability. More importantly, I've learned to trust my instincts about people's behavior, and to investigate suspicious circumstances rather than dismiss them as coincidence or bad luck. Our family relationships have been permanently altered by Marcus's crimes, and the realization that family loyalty can be exploited by people who view relationships as opportunities for criminal activity, rather than sources of mutual support and affection. Marcus will be eligible for parole in 14 years. Whether our family relationships can survive that long, and whether it would be safe or wise to rebuild connections with someone who demonstrated such calculated willingness to destroy his sister's future, remains an open and painful question. If you've made it this far, drop betrayed in the comments if you understand that sometimes the people who claim to love us most are the ones capable of causing the most devastating harm. The lesson I learned from having my identity stolen by my own brother wasn't about cybersecurity, financial protection, or criminal justice. It was about the difference between healthy family support and enabling criminal behavior, between trust and naivety, and between helping someone and becoming their victim. Identity theft by family members is particularly devastating because it combines sophisticated criminal activity with profound emotional betrayal. Marcus didn't just steal my money and damage my credit, he stole my sense of safety within my own family, my ability to trust people who claim to care about me, and my belief that family relationships provided protection rather than vulnerability. Tell me about a time when someone you trusted completely betrayed that trust in ways that seemed impossible until they happened. How did you rebuild your judgment and your sense of safety after learning that the people closest to you could be the most dangerous?